We begin a new era of accountability.
I can't say enough how significant this is.
City and county leaders are embarking on another new plan to fight the region's homelessness crisis. Will it work?
I cannot support this version of the interlocal agreement.
How will millions of dollars in new funding be spent?
We get up and go do stuff every day and we're homeless.
And will more voices at the table lead to better outcomes?
This is the closest that we've gotten as a community so far.
Our panel of experts weighs in.
There is tremendous collaboration.
We know that that investment is not enough.
Solving the homelessness puzzle. Next on City Inside Out. Welcome to this edition of City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. A new Regional Homelessness Authority is beginning to take shape as local leaders in Seattle and King County work to streamline a complex system of housing and social services. Will this effort work? Some officials are already pointing out flaws in the program, which has undergone some major changes since it was proposed more than a year ago. Seattle Mayor Jenny Derrick and King County Executive Dow Constantine first brought up the idea of a Regional Homelessness Authority in 2018.
We're fixing our fragmented response system.
But the process of merging $75 million from the city and $57 million from the county into one entity now has some homeless advocates feeling left out in the cold.
You spend all that money and now you're going to change it.
Follow the guidance and wisdom of the last 2 years.
We are not willing to accept just rearranging the chairs.
The concern comes from a recent revamp in the structure for the new authority. What was first proposed leaned heavily on subject matter experts to develop budgets and policies, and limited power to elected officials.
Okay, cool, and we'll put you on that referral list.
But what the county and city ended up endorsing was a plan to divide voting rights on the authority equally between Seattle, King County, suburban cities, and people with lived experience of homelessness.
It's not perfect by any means.
County Council member Jean Cole-Wells says giving suburban cities a stronger voice was the only way the plan was going to get countywide support.
You have to look at what is possible, what is desired, with what can get through.
All those in favor?
And while the plan did get through the approval process at the county and city levels, some battle lines have now been drawn.
Politics have already taken a hold in this structure.
Seattle City Council President Lorena Gonzalez, along with King County Council member Dave Upthegrove, were the no votes on creating the new Homelessness Authority.
There is a risk that this increases bureaucracy and reduces accountability.
Gonzalez is also concerned the county's more suburban cities won't adopt the controversial but evidence-based practices Seattle is using to deal with homelessness, giving this interlocal agreement, or ILA, a major problem right from the start.
I still believe that there are significant flaws in this version of the ILA that have not been addressed, or that I have a level of confidence will be meaningfully addressed in the future once the implementation of this work begins.
That implementation is still months away, as the authority looks for a CEO and starts to write a 5-year plan. But in the immediate future, get ready for a new discussion about dealing with regional homelessness that carries with it a lot of new questions. And joining us to discuss this very important issue, we have with us Leo Flor. He is the King County Director of Community and Human Services. Leo, good to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
We also have Alison Eisinger. She is Executive Director of the Seattle-King County Coalition on Homelessness. Alison, good to see you again.
Thank you very much.
And we have finally Jason Johnson. He is the Interim Director of Seattle's Human Services Department. Jason, great to have you here.
Thank you.
So let's get into this. And before we really get into the details of this new city-county interlocal agreement on homelessness, I want to go big picture. So we've seen efforts like this before. The 10-year plan to end homelessness, that started in 2005. One Table, a regional group working on homelessness, started in 2017, ended about a year later. Leo, I think the big question is, what's different this time?
Yeah, I think we see all of this as the development of this same idea that we've been striving for in this community for a while, which is how do you get the right scope of services, right scope of authority, mandate, resources, all properly aligned so that we can come up with the strategies that work, identify and prove that they work with data, and then have the resources to be able to make the changes to implement those quickly. And what we've seen with earlier versions of consolidation is we did get mandate together, but we didn't get resources together. Or we did get data together, but we didn't get decision-making together. And so I think this is the next step, and I feel like this is the closest that we've gotten as a community so far to getting that right consolidation, that right unification between decision-making, resources, data, and then feedback from the people we're serving.
Thanks for breaking that down. Alison, similar question to you. You have worked in coordinating homelessness services for decades in our region. Do you think having a regional authority will create some different results?
I think the proof is in the pudding.
Okay.
We really have maintained a hopeful and somewhat agnostic perspective at the coalition about the Regional Homelessness Authority, in part because, as we saw in the press to have both city and county councils pass the same legislation, which was necessary, there was a politicization of an advisory process that had really involved quite a bit of community input. Fundamentally, having a good, sound infrastructure in place is important. I think that Leo's description of the potential for what the new Regional Homelessness Authority could be is accurate. Without resources, however, it will not succeed. Fundamentally, making changes to the structure is not going to affect the lives of people in our community yet.
We're going to break down some of those changes in just a bit. Thank you for bringing that up. Jason, this is a major investment for the city, $75 million worth into this new agreement. What gives you the confidence that we'll see some different results from this regional approach?
Yeah, thank you. So those investments managed currently by the Human Services Department at the City of Seattle have shown incredible results, and thanks to the hard work of our provider network. Those investments have seen our ability to serve more people than ever before, the ability to get more people into permanent housing than ever before. We have more 24-hour enhanced shelter options for people than we have historically. So I feel confident in the city's ability to manage the investments, to manage this increase in investment. But as both Leo and Alison have said, we know that that investment is not enough. We also know that this issue is one that does not know jurisdictional borders. And the City of Seattle, and I take great pride in the work that we've done in the city, is reliant on a regional effort, an exercise in partnership with other cities and with the county, as well as with providers who operate regionally. And so I see this as an opportunity to expand on good work that's already in process, and really take a different approach, one that has a far greater reach than just the city boundary.
Very important, and our state legislators are talking about this a lot this year too. Thank you for bringing that up. So Leo, let's dive into some of these concerns that Alison and other advocates have brought up. Specifically, this idea about the power the Sound Cities Association will have on this governing committee. When these suburban cities say, we don't agree with those evidence-based practices that you're using, Seattle, we're not going to do that, where does that leave us?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm most excited about with the structure that we're moving towards is a consolidation of the data. I think one of the things that we really don't have a complete and even understanding about in our community is what works, what doesn't work, despite the fact that in particular cases or particular places, we do know what works. And so as we get a regional data system together and all of our providers and all of our jurisdictions are all measuring things in the same way, getting that data back, folks' particular opinions about what they think should work was really going to fade away to what is working, and I think all of us are committed to doing what works.
Yeah, that politicization piece, though, I don't know if we can get away from that. What do you think about that part?
I think this is a problem that people care about. And I think anytime you have something that affects people, that people care about, that they could see themselves in that situation, you're going to get politicization. And so I don't think that that's a bad thing. The question is just how do we harness this political interest, and do we use it as a means to work together, to unify like the system is, or do we use it as something that keeps us separate or keeps us from working together? And I think as long as we use it to unify, it's going to be a powerful force for good.
Okay. Alison, looking at this power structure, people with lived experience of homelessness do have a seat at the table, 3 votes on the governing committee. I wanted to talk about this. Is that enough of a presence for that voice to be heard and make an impact? What do you think?
People who know homelessness firsthand, either currently or in the recent past, have incredibly important insight to bring to bear on making decisions that that will shape what our response to homelessness looks like. Mm-hmm. I also believe that power is real and power imbalances are not so easily overcome. So we have a number of organizations in this community that are made up of people who are or who have been homeless. Sometimes those organizations are loud and angry and perhaps controversial, and they are sharing really important perspectives and information.
Right.
I think what's going to be really important is to recognize that individual people bring important perspective and information, but having a constituency and an organization is also important. When you think about the fact that an extremely high proportion of people who are homeless or who have experienced trauma, are people who are living with disabilities, are people who have been treated exceptionally badly by many of our systems, you can come to recognize that they both are incredibly important voices and advocates and are people who may not have the same position of power at the table as an elected official.
Jason, I want to get down to brass tacks here. Council President Gonzalez, others on the council have said in the cases where the city council doesn't necessarily agree with the approaches from suburban cities, Seattle would withhold its part of the funding. For example, a city might say, we think homeless people with drug problems who refuse treatment should go into involuntary detox. I'm bringing up a for instance there, but is that a situation where Seattle would say, we're not paying for that? It seemed like kind of a rubber meets the road piece to this.
We believe that people deserve shelter and that there shouldn't be barriers to people accessing a roof overhead. We try to reduce barriers in our contracts and ensure that the insight that comes from the provider community guides exactly how we craft policy and how we craft language in those contracts. We have been able to, over the course of 3 years, transition much of our shelter from a overnight-only, high-barrier shelter system to one that is 24 hours.
Right.
That has reduced a lot of those barriers for entrance. Is harm reduction in its model, is housing first in its model, and in its approach. And on day one, starts a conversation about how to get people housed. I don't believe that many communities regionally are going to have issue with those type of policies.
Okay.
You know, we are all better served when people are safe, when people are indoors, and people are being served.
Okay.
You know, as my role will continue at the Human Services Department in partnership with you know, whoever it is that leads this regional authority, and with the boards, including those elected officials on boards, will always be to assert that we need to get as many people as possible connected to the services they need.
Okay.
All that said, regionalism and having a discussion about what works in different sub-regions has always been part of the conversation. And so I also acknowledge that what's working in Seattle may not work in Enumclaw or in Bellevue. And so there needs to be a regional conversation about those policies, about those programs, and how they're implemented.
Okay.
May I
Briefly,
add a word about this? I think regionalism, for it to be meaningful, it requires that there is buy-in from the 39 municipalities, but it also requires that people who live all across King County are connected to solutions that work. What's happening is that there are hundreds of thousands of people all across King County who see the crisis in every neighborhood, in every block, and who want solutions. And it's the voices of those people that have to be brought to bear in making our truly regional decisions take root. That may take a little while. I think the conversations are going to be sometimes heated, but necessary. people want to see that their neighbors have a safe place to live at night.
Okay.
There are hundreds and thousands of school-age children who are homeless in every community.
Yeah.
And I think the community's desire to see a better answer is what is ultimately the most hopeful thing to rest our plan on.
Thank you for that. And let's talk about some of these answers. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit here. As our region works to refine its approach to homelessness, one new county-funded program is drawing some attention, Eagle Village. This temporary housing facility in Soto was made to help homeless Native Americans, but its organizers say it could provide some lessons for people of all cultures.
Yeah, that was a good one of them.
Serena Laws Spencer and her wife, Chris, have run a quilt-making business for the past 12 years, and for the past 4 years in Seattle have been without a home.
We were squatting or living in our van or staying with friends, but we didn't have a permanent shelter.
But when they reached out to the Chief Seattle Club in downtown Seattle last year, they discovered they had a new option, the recently opened King County-funded Eagle Village.
It is a connection where you kind of start building this family.
That family is on some unused county metro land in Soto, where 6 trailers provide homes to 31 people of Native heritage, people who Serena says began their lives at a racial disadvantage.
My future wealth was stolen from me 200 years ago.
According to King County's homelessness count figures, Native Americans are the focus of a challenging statistic.
We're only 1% of the population in the region, but yet make up 10% of the homelessness, right?
That's Chief Seattle Club's Deputy Director, Derrick Belgarde, who says making a cultural connection with homeless Native people is critical.
Everything we do, we think about cultural relevancy first.
Fair housing laws dictate Eagle Village cannot exclude non-Native American adults. But Belgarde says all applicants who ask for community-specific housing, like this facility, are up for consideration first.
We could fill up 4 or 5 Eagle Villages right now if we wanted, if we had the ability to get our people off the streets. Just that sense of community, it's just growing really strong here, and that's the game-changing piece.
Colleen Echohawk, Executive Director of the Chief Seattle Club, says the 12 by 15 units at Eagle Village might seem small, but they're making a big impact.
So I think it's really good and important and the right thing to do, but it's also the effective thing to do.
As King County and the City of Seattle look to get results from a new Regional Homelessness Authority, Echohawk says taking a close look at how effective Eagle Village has been so far could provide some answers.
We are dealing with the symptoms of racism. That's why we have so much homelessness. And so how will we be effective in working on that is to create programs like this.
Programs that, for Serena and Chris, have provided some stability so they can work, save money, and get back to focusing on their future.
We're doing what we can do to take care of our situation and ourselves and be self-sufficient and responsible.
And back to our panel here. Leo, Eagle Village seems to be an early success story. So instantly the question is, how do you replicate this at scale? Talk about the cooperation behind Eagle Village, maybe some of the other innovations or creative solutions that the county's working on right now when it comes to homelessness.
Innovative is an interesting way to talk about this because there are some parts of it that are innovative. So, use unused land, bring in modular structures to speed up development times. But there's also something about this that's not new at all, and that's that yes, we need to get people inside, but movement and progress on this issue is more about community and connection. And I think that's kind of an ageless thing that we might need to remember a little bit more than we have in recent times. And so when we take a look at the principles that animate a project like Eagle Village, or that we are setting the new regional authority up to be animated by, I think one of the key principles is go to the folks that we're going to serve, ask them what would help them, and then tailor services based on that. And for some folks, that feels really innovative in a human services spirit. But I'll tell you what, when we went out to Microsoft, when we went out to a couple of the other, big corporations that, operate in and around our area to talk about this idea, they're like, we figured that out a couple of decades ago. It's called ask your customer what they would like and then deliver that service, and that's how you'll become successful. And so innovative, I think so. But it's not that we invented something new. I think it's that we went back to something that we've always known.
Right, right. And there are some other pieces, too. I know the West Wing at the King County Jail, that took some changing there. I wanted to touch on that briefly because that sounds like something that, how about creative? How about that type of a solution for something along those lines?
Two principles that are really jumping out as what are effective, and then we're looking for places to put them. So one is center the people that we're going to serve and ask them what effective services would look like. And then two is it's got to be 24/7 if it's going to provide the stability that's going to allow somebody to make progress on their path towards housing. And so the West Wing is a really good example of that. And it was not uncontroversial. So the idea of, what does it look like to use a former carceral facility to provide shelter was one that we really had to think hard about. Ultimately, Executive Constantine really said, you have to compare that against the reality of somebody sleeping outside under a bridge in the cold, and all of a sudden, the quote-unquote optics really make a lot more sense. Let's get folks inside, let's stabilize them, let's connect them to services, and as long as we're doing that, if we happen to have that in a former carceral facility, if we happen to have that in modulars at Metro property, or if we have that in a hard stand building, we're going to be successful.
Okay, thank you for that. Alison, this idea from Eagle Village, making this cultural connection to people who are homeless, it's definitely having an impact. Should that be a top priority? Is this the right way to focus homeless services going forward? Your thoughts?
Well, I had the great pleasure of being there on the day that Eagle Village opened, and it was a beautiful, beautiful experience. And I want to give huge credit to the people and organizations that came together to do what is both innovative and very old school. I think that paying attention to the realities of people who are homeless is a vital and necessary core element to any and all solutions. The coalition, again, took a somewhat skeptical view around the West Wing, and we really appreciated the opportunity to raise questions and to be skeptical and to engage people who had both experience with homelessness and incarceration in the course of developing that. But those are both shelters. What is most innovative lies before us, which is to gather the resources to create the homes that people ultimately need.
That is definitely a big part of the bottom line here. Jason, let me just touch on Eagle Village one more time with you. It's important to point out this is really part of a larger plan to help Native American homeless people in our area. The new All building set to come online next year with 80 low-income units, a health clinic at Pioneer Square to help Native people. I want to talk about this cultural approach overall, a more targeted approach, I guess you might call it, how it might be replicated with other groups, maybe our East African community, LGBTQ youth, something along those lines. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I will echo that collaboration is king. We made investments that not just asked the question and collects new data so that we can make sure that those investments are having an impact on the populations that we most desperately need to serve. But we also are investing in organizations where cultural competency and the ability to serve those populations are invested in. And, sometimes it is, easy to say that you have an open door policy and you serve everyone. But there are organizations who have expertise in serving queer youth. There are organizations that have expertise in doing outreach to an African American population who's living on the streets. We need to make sure that we are guiding investments that support those kind of organizations so that we are doing everything possible to disrupt the inequities that exist in the homeless population data.
Leo, I'm going to look ahead here. I want to talk about how you might measure success of this new regional authority. Will it be an increased number of people in permanent housing, fewer unauthorized campsites on the streets of Seattle? How do you look at that? What do you point to maybe a year from now that says, okay, we've made some progress?
Yeah, absolutely. One, I think we have to remember what we designed this new structure for, and that is the homelessness crisis response. Alison has brought up something that's fundamentally important here, which is that the primary driver, McKinsey just released a study on this yesterday, the primary driver of homelessness in our region is a lack of affordable housing for the people who need it. So we will not have meaningful, drastic reduction in homelessness until we address that. That being said, improvement in how we serve people when they're on the verge of homelessness or experiencing homelessness is fundamentally important. And you can have no credible discussion of homelessness if you're not talking about racial disproportionality.
Okay.
So we see that in Eagle Village. And so to answer your question, the first, I think, goal that we have, how will we know that we've been successful? We will have reduced the disproportionality and the racial disproportionality in particular amongst people experiencing homelessness, one. Okay. Two is we'll have fewer people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness in our community. That is absolutely one of the reasons that we're doing this. And that is not to get people out of sight. That is to get people safe, get people connected with additional services, because that's how we know that they form the community and get the resources that then bring them to housing. And then third, it's going to be a more efficient system. It's going to be a system that does take the limited resources that we have now and deploy them so that we're getting more out to the community, getting more out to solving the issues that clients are identifying for us. And I think that's really the prioritization that our community expects.
Thank you very much for that. Alison, some final thoughts here. I know the authority is going to be the new agency that service providers very soon will be renegotiating contracts with. I want to talk about going forward progress you're hoping this regional authority can make.
I think I would somewhat reframe that to say the progress that I hope our region can make. The regional authority is, in some respects, a tool. And it needs to be deployed to do the kinds of things and to start moving towards the kinds of outcomes that Leo just described. We have before us a challenge, which is to ensure that people's understanding at a visceral level of what works, the idea of housing first, which now makes sense to more and more people, is matched with the investments that we need. We opened one permanent supportive housing building last year in our region. And that is clearly inadequate to meet the needs of all people. Quite honestly, a bureaucratic structure as a vehicle for contracting and ensuring good quality of services, addressing racial disproportionality aggressively in its disbursement of funds is necessary but not sufficient. People who are watching, who care about this issue, need to get engaged. What's happening in Olympia right now is going to have a tremendous bearing statewide as well as in our region. And I hope that people think about what they might do to be part of a truly regional response to a crisis that touches all of us.
Thank you very much for that. Jason, final words.
I take the stewardship role very seriously, and as Alison said very well, this structure does not in of itself effectively end homelessness. But the structure is important, and we want to make sure that that structure is in place, that is working efficiently, effectively, and that really targets the limited investments that we have, the limited public investments that we have in the right way. So I stand today very hopeful that this regional authority is going to end duplication. It's going to address fragmentation. It is going to offer a level of clarity to our business partners about exactly what is expected and what can be achieved with their public investment.
Thank you very much to all of you for this discussion, and we will be right back.
Having one oversight committee for the entire homeless projects, I'm hopeful for it.
We need a great American housing build out.
Provide more subsidized housing. Are we trying to help homeless people, or are we just trying to get rid of them?
We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Before we close today, it's time for our weekly CIO poll. Do you support the new Regional Homelessness Authority? Yes, no, or are you undecided? We want to know what you think. Cast your vote and weigh in with your comments at our website, seattlechannel.org/cityinsideout. While you're there, you can watch our programs online anytime. Coming up next week, boosting renters' rights statewide. Lawmakers in Olympia are considering bills to prevent no-excuse eviction, as well as other tenant protections. Landlords are pushing back, saying some of these new laws would present an economic hardship for them and lead to higher rents. We hear from both sides next time on City Inside Out. I hope you join us.